The Texas Politics Project survey gauges how registered Texas voters feel about the state of politics on both a local and national level. The survey is conducted by the Department of Government at the University of Texas at Austin. And as President Trump is now in his 101 days of office for a second term, his overall approval rating nets positive, but just barely. 47% of Texas voters polled approved of his performance in office, while 46% disapproved. To tell us more about the poll, Dr. James Henson, director of the Texas Politics Project. Welcome, Dr. Henson, to Hello Houston.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Before we get into all of the discussion, what I just want to clarify is when actually were these folks polled? What was the time period so that we can place what had happened in the world around them?
Sure, when, where, and how. We were in the field collecting data from April 18th to the 28th. We had 1,200 registered voters, and we use YouGov for data collection. This is, I think, we do a lot of counting, but I think this is the 67th poll in the series, which we started in 2008.
And so, it came
before, it's a big time series.
Came before Liberation Day, correct?
No, it was after Liberation.
After Liberation
Day. Did I say that? April? I'm sorry. April 18th to the 28th.
No, you were right. I'm wrong.
So, Dr.
Okay, all right, cool.
Dr. Henson, based on this latest poll that you have, is the honeymoon stage of Trump's presidency over for Texans, or is it really too early to tell?
Well, I think it's over for some of them that were probably not inclined to give him much of a honeymoon anyway. But, he's still holding on to Republican support. So, you mentioned that 47 support, 46 or approved, disapproved, being 47, 46. That was just a little bit down from when we were in the field in February, when he was at 52, 38. And what we saw was just a little bit, 2 or 3 points of attrition in every major partisan group. In other words, Republicans dropped only slightly from 92% in February to 89% in April. And we saw similar drops in the other groups. Underlying thing here is that while there's a lot of context here, people have a fixed attitude of Donald Trump. They know what they think of him, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents. That's useful for us in a way because it holds that personal piece equal, and we are able to kind of look at what's going on in the policy environment.
So when you do look at that, when we're talking about almost fealty to this leader by his supporters, that seems to stay pretty consistent. Even when you see a slight dip, because of margin of error and all things considered, is that really significant when it's within his base? And do we need to see shift in his base to see shift overall?
Yes and yes. So,
okay.
I think it's, we have to be careful in looking at these, 2-3 point shifts. I think I absolutely agree and appreciate the nuance there. I think what we look at in this is when we see those small shifts kind of in each group, it does tell us that there's a little something going on. That said, we're still very, very early in this presidency, and there is a lot going on. And so, we're gonna wait and see. And it's always like this. We get the new data, we're excited to see it, and then what we're looking for is, okay, well, let's see what happens in the next one.
Yeah. I know Celeste wants to jump in with policy. I've got one more nuts and boltsy question about the polling. How quickly what you've seen over the years of doing this, how quickly do people's thoughts and opinions change when events change around them? And what I mean by that is, okay, so the tariffs, maybe there's a lot of talk about tariffs and all of that. Do people hold on to their beliefs usually for a period of time after announcements and then start to shift? Or do people pretty much react in the moment?
Well, it's, as you might imagine, it's complicated. So the answer to that is there are times when when there is a big, what we call an external or an exogenous shock, when there's something big that happens, you tend to see quick movement. But that depends on whether but it's dependent on two things. One, how how closely held or how is the opinion that people are bringing to bear? In other words, is this big event meeting, is it something new, or is it confronting within our respondents an already held belief? And that tends to be a bulwark against rapid changes. The other thing is durability. What we often see is big shifts in opinion, but they often don't last. And so then after a certain amount of time, people kind of revert to the mean.
Well, Dr. Henson, when we are looking at the slight dip in Texans' approval of President Trump, what would you equate that to? What are they saying? Well, my approval rating is not as much as it was before.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, if you look at the other results in the poll and the policy stuff, it sounds like you want to talk about, this is driven a lot by the economic uncertainty that was already out there. And I think the way that the president has aggravated that. So there's that piece in which the economy looms so large right now. The other piece of this, I think, that it helps, explain what we're seeing is a really interesting shift in where people are paying attention. And this in some ways goes back to the previous question. And that is, for a long time, one of the most predictable attributes of polling in Texas was that when we asked people, what is the most important problem facing the state? Well, more than half, and sometimes as high as 70% of Republicans say either immigration or border security. And that just defines so much in the political universe and created a center of gravity in the Republican Party that Donald Trump exploited very productively for him, obviously in political terms. Now what we're seeing is a certain degree of attention moving away from immigration and border security. The underlying attitudes aren't changing very much. For example, that Republicans favoring more punitive kind of enforcement-based strategy. But the share of Republicans that say that immigration and border security are the most important problems facing the state has declined by about 33 points between this last poll and you use February 24 as a baseline. That's really significant. And at the same time, we've seen attention among Republicans diverted to some degree to economic related issues, mostly prices.
Does that mean that they feel that the immigration is working so they're less concerned with it, or is that the growth of the concern over the economy doesn't give them enough bandwidth to worry about both? Well,
we don't know for sure, but what we suspect is that it's both. And so obviously the big driver of media coverage in the news for, most of the Biden term was the flow, the increased flow of migrants on the borders, the second order problems that were coming from that, the political response to that, where there was criticism of the Democrat in the White House or Governor Abbott's initiative with Operation Lone Star. Now that situation has really abated for the time being, at least, I think that goes to your other part of your hypothesis. As the economy has gotten more salient and more problematic, that, it's the combination of this problem seems not as prominent, this one seems more prominent.
So Texas's 89th legislature is wrapping up soon. Dr. Henson, what are some of the top priorities Texans are looking at within the state?
Yeah, these were also, very interesting results in the poll. So we gave people about a dozen general issue areas and said, tell us how important you think it is for the legislature to address this. The top 5 among Texans overall were pretty practical and a mixture of things we've heard a lot about and things we haven't. So number one was, more than 80% of folks told us that it was either extremely or very important for the legislature to improve the reliability of the state's energy grid. Second, lower the costs of everyday goods and services. Third, happily for the leadership, reduce property taxes. Fourth, improve the reliability of the state's water supply. And fifth, increase access to health care. All of those were cited as very or extremely important by 70% or more.
Interesting.
And so those are up there at the top. But then if you drill down, there are partisan differences, as you might imagine.
If you are a Texas politician, maybe with the name Paxton or Cornyn, and you're looking at this survey, How do you think you should be interpreting it, and how should you react to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, if you're part of Lieutenant Governor Patrick and Ken Paxton are going to have slightly different competing interests in this, I should say. I think writ large, if you're a Texas elected official right now, you're probably a Republican and you're thinking about how your agenda is unfolding, you're probably feeling pretty good about this. The property tax legislation is not passed, but the signals coming out of the legislature earlier this week are that the House and the Senate have kind of reconciled their competing visions of how to execute this, much anticipated. And when you look at the other things, the legislature is paying attention to infrastructure. There's not a lot of big headline grabbing legislation, but there are big bills on water working their way through the process. They're still working out some of the differences in the water bill, but I think everybody expects that's going to go somewhere. There are a bunch of grid bills and electricity related bills that are working their way through. I think you're feeling pretty good, but you're feeling even better. I mean, I think probably more to the underlying current of your question. If you're a Republican like Lieutenant Governor Patrick or Ken Paxton, and you're considering running and you're thinking about what the primary election is going to look like next year, the top 5 issues among Republicans are reduced property taxes. You got to hit there. Pass legislation that requires local cooperation with federal immigration efforts. That's likely to happen. Reduce access to bail for violent criminals. That's 3rd. That's moving through the system. Improve the grid is also 4th among Republicans. And then work on water, also prominent among Republicans. So you're hitting on all cylinders really on those issues. The only thing that's making you nervous is that the other thing in that Republican top priority, as it is overall, is lowering prices. And you're kind of at the mercy of the animal spirits of the economy and, I guess similarly animal spirits in the White House. And there's not much you can do about that.
Right. Dr. James Henson is the director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas. Dr. Henson, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
It's a real pleasure. I enjoyed talking with you all.